Hey YouTube, it's Faye, and for today's video, I have Brandon's Tacoma back in the shop because I'm going to be performing an alternator upgrade. Now, I know you can't tell from looking at it because it is so fantastic, but this is actually the base model Tacoma without the towing package. And because of that, it comes from the factory with loud. It comes from the factory with a 100 amp alternator. The tow package comes with a 130 amp alternator. So I'm gonna be upgrading to that today, and in order to do that, I'm also going to be beefing up the power wire to the fuse box and replacing the fuse from the 120 amp to the 140 amp alternator fuse. So basically turning it into the tow package charging system. Now, why am I doing this? Well, because if you cannot tell, there are a lot of accessories that have been added to this truck, so the alternator does have to work a little bit harder, and I'm also getting ready for eventually swapping out the battery. Now, right now, the battery is totally fine. There's no reason to throw it away. But when this battery dies, we're gonna upgrade to an AGM battery, and those charge at a little bit of a different rate. But for that, I'll have to add a voltage booster, and that will be coming a little bit later on down the line. And I'll talk about that a little bit later when the time comes. I ordered all these parts from Toyota, so let me show you what I got. Here's a remanufactured alternator, and here is the 140 amp alternator fuse. And in case you're wondering how I knew which fuse to upgrade to, it's just the wiring diagram off of TIS, and you can see down here it has two options for the alternator fuse: 140, 120 with little star 1 or 2, and one just says down here, with trailer towing or without trailer towing. And now the remanufactured alternator was the only option that I had from the dealership, but let me just say that a lot of times I actually prefer, especially from the dealership, the remanufactured part, depending on who remanufactures it. Now, I actually recently just purchased an AC compressor for this truck as well, and there was a new option. There was no new option for this, not through Toyota, but from an aftermarket company. Actually, they're back ordered from Toyota, so that's unfortunate. But when I called the company to see what AC compressor I should purchase, whether it was the new or remanufactured, and price point wasn't an issue, they said that the new units came from China, but the remanufacturing of the units was done in the US. And what I've found is that the remanufactured units that are made in the US are held to higher standards than a new unit made in China. So in this case, this was the only option available from the Toyota dealership, remanufactured, and remanufactured by Denso, inspected by Toyota. This is what I want. Now, I realize that you may have come to this video because you have an alternator charging issue. So let's talk about that real quick. Now, I did recently make a very in-depth tutorial about how to check your charging system output, and I will link that right above somewhere, right here, right now. But let's specifically talk about the Gen 2 Tacoma, because you might have gone to my previous video and heard what I said about a charging voltage between 13.5 and 14.5 on most vehicles and been like, oh crap, my Gen 2 Tacoma is charging like crap. But that might not be the case for you. This is why I recommend that you should always look up the specific charging voltage of your vehicle, because in this case, the Tacoma does charge a little bit lower than I'd like to see on regular Toyotas. The official Toyota repair manual, this taken from TIS, says that charging on the Gen 2 Tacoma is okay at 13.2 volts. That to me is low. Just mentioning this because we don't always want to jump to conclusions around here. Let's just go over really quickly how to check the charging voltage of the alternator. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the truck on, turn a bunch of loads on. So I'm going to turn the blower motor on, the wiper motors on, the high beams on, and I'm going to rev the engine at 2000 RPM, and I'm going to look at the readout on my multimeter and just verify that the charging voltage is within that range specified by Toyota. All right, so that just caught you up. As you can see, this alternator, this stock alternator, the 100 amp, is charging absolutely fine. This is not replacing a bad part today. This is just an upgrade. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do to begin this job is disconnect the battery, and I'm also gonna remove the battery to give me easier access to the fuse box for replacing this fuse. And we're just gonna put the battery on the trickle charger while I'm doing this job, because while theoretically it may only take me 3 hours, when I'm actually trying to film it all for you guys, it might take me all freaking day. To make it easier to access the alternator, I removed the plastic seal here that sits on top of the radiator support and the fan shroud. Now in my case, we've got an upgraded CSF radiator in here that is much wider than stock, so I had to remove the fan as well to get the shroud out of there. You don't have to do that. I also removed my thermostat and my lower radiator hose just to give myself some more room, especially with the added belt here that I have for the supercharger, just gonna give me a lot more space. But now, just keep in mind, I did a lot more work than you have to, unless of course you have similar upgrades to what we have going on here. Now I have a bit of a unique challenge here. You can see there is the tensioner pulley all the way down in there, for my serpentine belt. I can either remove the supercharger belt, which I may do, or I might just see if I can loosen it in there. I'm just gonna give it a shot, why not? And I'm gonna use what I lovingly call my Toyota wrench. One side is a 12mm, the other side is a 14. Super long, lots of leverage, and I can actually sneak it in there and get it around that tensioner pulley. And I can loosen it just enough to sneak it off of that alternator belt. So, woo, save myself a little bit of time maybe.
Woof! Hallelujah!
So now my wrench is kind of stuck there, but that's okay, don't care, small price to pay. Now I'm gonna undo a little zip tie that keeps this wire harness out of the way. I'm also gonna undo this little green plug. It's a little hard to see, but we're pushing in the tab on the back there. You can also see there's a gray plastic cover on the end of the power wire for the alternator that just protects it from accidentally grounding out on something and shooting some sparks. So we're gonna pull that off. Underneath the plastic cover there, you can see a little 10mm bolt that's holding that power wire on, so we're gonna disconnect that now. And this here is the wire I'm gonna be upgrading. I actually like to put that little nut back on right away so I don't lose it, because they're kind of specific. They got funky little washers on some of them, so. Now I'm gonna remove that upper alternator bolt with my other Toyota wrench, which also features a 12 and a 14, but this time, both sides are ratcheting. There we go, heck yes, get that out of there. Next, I'm gonna remove this 10mm bolt there that's securing this little bracket that holds the wire harness into place. We're gonna take a quick look on our new alternator to see the location of the other bolt, so I can do that one by feel. Another trick is to jack the vehicle up and take the wheel off completely, or I'm small enough that I can actually fit inside of here. And I'm gonna remove 1, 2, 3, and 4 little clips to take off this little liner here. Actually, I'm gonna leave those 2 on and just take off 3. There we go. Now we can easily see where that other 10mm bolt is that holds that little wire harness bracket. I'm also gonna unclip it from right there by pushing down on that tab while pulling it forward. Now this whole little bracket is loose, and the last thing we have is the lower bolt. And you can see from this angle, I've got my Toyota wrench on that 14mm bolt right through the wheel well here. So I'm gonna undo it. It's gonna be impossible to film, but you don't need to see me just ratcheting this thing. I just wanna note here too that without all the supercharger stuff, it's easy to get to this bolt from the front. If I just move the drive belt a little bit, there you can see easily, that's the lower bolt for the alternator. So much easier to get to without all this other stuff, but your daily driving experience is not as fun. Actually found it was a little bit easier to go in with the shorty there to get that bolt. You can see that I've got it almost all the way out. Alrighty, well I screwed myself here because the bolt is bottoming out on what? The wrench that's stuck in there. So I'm gonna have to go in, sorry guys, with 2 hands, up, lies. Oh, see, as soon as I start to doubt myself, the powers that be like, let me show ya. Whoops. How magical you are there, little Faye. Woo! Bottom bolt. Yes. Okay. Now to pull it out, I'm just gonna use a little teeny tiny pry bar. Because my electrical tape has seen better days. But you don't just want to pry anywhere. Just use caution when you're prying. I'm just gonna stick it down there. There's like a flat spot right there that you totally can't see. Just imagine that you can see that there's a flat spot. And I'm just gonna gently pry out. I made an error leaving all the supercharger stuff in place. Woo! Okay, all right. A 10mm bolt to remove this. Little bracket there. Okay, think we're home sailing! So the first thing that I'm gonna do, even though I did get this from the dealership and I know it's the correct part number, can't make assumptions. So we're just gonna do a visual inspection before I go and try to woman handle this thing in there. We're just gonna make sure, are these the same connector? Yes, they are. It's just, is everything the same? Let's look at our pulleys, make sure there's the same amount of ribs on them. I'm happy, I'm satisfied. So while that is fresh in my mind and I know how this thing goes in, we're just gonna put it in. The installation is just the reverse of removal. So let's see. Find the way back. Okay, all right. Made a big deal about nothing. Okay. Now to make sure that I'm lining up the bottom correctly, I'll just put that top bolt in first and thread it in just a little bit. So now I'll be able to stick that bottom bolt in, which I've got right here, and I actually can do that from the front, believe it or not. Also just gonna put this bracket back on before I forget. Now I'm tightening both of those alternator mounting bolts. The torque spec is 32 foot-pounds, and then I'm releasing tension on that drive belt and sneaking it up and around that pulley. Yay! Oh my gosh. All right, well that was definitely way more difficult with the supercharger belt in place, but you know, I just kind of wanted to prove to myself that I could do it. So before I reconnect the wire harness or that little bracket with those two 10mm bolts, I'm going to swap out this fuse while everything is disconnected. And then of course, I'm going to upgrade some of my power wires. So we've got our fuse box here. I'm gonna disconnect this auxiliary stuff, and then we've got a 10mm nut right here, a 10mm bolt back here, a 10mm bolt here. Here's the fuse we're gonna be replacing. And this here is really thin wire that goes from our fuse and relay panel to the battery. So I'm gonna be beefing up this wire. Got a little zip tie right there, so I'm gonna clip that off. Next, I'm removing this 12mm nut that holds the alternator wire and another aftermarket power wire, clipping these zip ties that hold the wire harness to the side of the fuse box, disconnecting these 3 electrical connectors, and I have a couple extra things in here because of the supercharger auxiliary water pump. Now we're gonna pull this whole little window up. Do you see how it's moving? It's 2 pieces actually. So we've got these tiny little tabs here. Just gonna grab a flathead screwdriver and pry up on the tab. See that? And then that's gonna release one side. Just got that tab on the other side too. And now this part comes up. And I'm gonna remove these wire harnesses, put all that aside gently. So now there's actually multiple pieces that make this whole fuse box. So I want to detach the guts from the body. And to do that, there are a bunch of little plastic tabs. There's another one right here, another one right here, right there. There's 6 right there. Okay. How's that for a good way to show you? I've got a screwdriver in every single one of those tabs. All right, so the 2 pieces are starting to separate now. So you can see we've got the inner piece, and this is actually, that's the factory line where the 2 pieces come apart. And as soon as you pull up, all my little pocket pry bars just sort of fell out. So that's why they're not in there anymore. This just takes some patience. I sprayed a little WD-40 in here, and I am not sure what happened. Either I forgot to film this or I accidentally deleted some clips, but this is after the fact to take the battery back out to show you guys. The wire harness enters the side of the fuse box with another little zip tie right here and electrical tape. So this is after the fact. This is after I've put everything back together, and you can see my zip tie and my electrical tape is back there now that the job is done. We've got one here and one on the back side, which is going to be hard for you to see because I have this little auxiliary coolant reservoir for the supercharger cooling system. But there's another little wire harness that comes off here, also with a zip tie, also with a bunch of electrical tape. You're going to want to cut both of those things off because in order to separate the fuse box fully, you really have to remove this upper cartridge. If you're just trying to tilt up one side to access that fuse, it's going to be impossible to slide this little piece back in. So you really do have to take everything apart and fully separate them. Once you've separated the fuse box into 2 pieces, you'll be able to easily access the 2 bolts on the side of the front of the fuse. Got one 10mm bolt on this side, and then this one right here holds the wire. Look at that too. Looking down inside that wire, we can see that some corrosion is starting to occur. Now, going from 120 amp fuse to 140 amp fuse isn't the largest jump in the world, but this wire is kind of dinky, so we're gonna beef this one up a little bit and go for an even larger gauge. Now, if crimping your own wire is just not your thing, you can pre-purchase like basic battery cables on Amazon, and you can find them in similar lengths. And if you choose anything that's like a battery cable, it's gonna be quite beefy, right? This is an example of something that you could pre-purchase, but I'm gonna make my own. I've got a nice collection of different wire thicknesses, but I'm gonna use this one. This is a 4-gauge wire, so this can carry a lot of amperage, and this is something that I commonly use for power wires. I also cut it much longer than I needed, not much longer, but by a couple inches. This is about 13 inches long. I cut this one 15 inches long just in case he wants to put a taller battery in there or something else. Just give us a little bit of extra play, extra room. I also like this because it's super, it's flexible. So I'm gonna have no problem bending this around to whatever shape I want. Now I've got my crimper, and I've got a bunch of little terminal ends here. Look at these. And I'm just gonna match them up to the diameter that just came on the factory one. Just note here that we do have 2 different terminal end sizes. We got this little one right here and a larger one. Just using a razor blade to cut off the end of the insulation. Alrighty, I got my little hydraulic crimper sitting happily in the vise, and I already did one side for the Instagram and the TikToks. I'm sorry, you guys. I broke my camera. All I have is my phone to record my videos with now, so I cannot have 2 recording devices at once. So we had to make a sacrifice, but you only need to see this once. So the crimper comes with a bunch of dies. I just chose the size die that match the terminal end that I'm using. You just exchange those out. It's pretty cool. You can see I've already got my heat shrink on there, so I'm thinking ahead. I just like to squeeze and get it preset in there, so it is holding my little terminal in the tool. Then I insert the cable in there and I push it. I hold it in, and then with the other hand I just squeeze, start crimping, and you just go until it don't go no mo. Then we release. Look at both of those beautiful little crimps, nice and solid. These aren't going frickin' anywhere. All right, so now we're gonna just put our little heat shrink on there if we want. I mean, not necessary, but it looks nice. In order to get to the back side of the fuse, we've got to remove this little wire harness junction block thing. We've got 4 tabs, and you're gonna pry up on all 4 of them with a little flathead screwdriver of some sort, and then pull up on this thing. I sprayed a little WD-40 in there and actually plugged the connector back in and used that as my grip because it's got this little, now you don't pull by the wires, but do you see how the white connector has that little shelf there? I used that as a grip, and that's how I was able to pull it out. That one's not easy though. That one is not easy though. And using my little magnet, fishing that guy out of there. Whew, that is not an easy swap. My goodness. Starting that 10mm bolt on the back. I know you can't see, but one thing I like to do is just use a socket with like a little extension of some sort like that, so I'm able to grip it. And these require like 0 torque, you guys, so just don't over tighten them. That's probably enough right there, to be honest. Now it's time to install our new power wire on that lower bolt in there. And you may think, what the heck? Why aren't you putting that heat shrink on yet, Faye? I'm actually not gonna put it up here. There's nothing, it's so protected in there. It's not gonna hit anything. I actually put this on for a little extra insulation when we're down in here. So I'm gonna test fit it first, see where it's gonna end up, mark it, and then heat shrink it there. Okay, so with the cable in place, it's gonna be rubbing, hitting right about here. This is absolutely not something that you have to do as part of the alternator upgrade, but I just wanted to mention it because you are gonna see this battery cable, the negative battery cable, increase in size. You can see already that the ground strap here is massive, but this wire right here, I just detached from this loom, this harness that has our alternator, our battery power wire to the back of the engine block. And I'll show you how I access that underneath the vehicle in case you want to do this too while you're in here. And you can see right there, that little 12mm bolt right there holds on the battery ground cable. So I'm just gonna undo that bolt and pull the negative wire out, measure it, make a new one, and reattach it right there where it was designed to be from the factory. And there's one more ground wire that I'm upgrading today. You can see this little teeny tiny ground strap right here. I'm also gonna be unbolting that and beefing that up as well. And that is also a 12mm bolt. Then you just release all these little tabs in order to pop the wires out of this big plastic clip, which you can see is just one big piece that just holds all these wires tightly together here on the side of the engine. And then we're just very carefully going in and separating all these wires from the harness. Just really careful. I always like to put my little razor blade in and cut up. And there we go. I can't believe that that's our block to chassis ground wire. And there's our battery ground wire. All right, come here, you guys. Get out of there. All righty. All right, so here's what we're working with. Here's what we're replacing today.
I've got these guys for cutting battery cables.
So just wanted to show you the difference in what I had before, the stock, and what I'm upgrading to, this 0 gauge. So you can see that I've got, gosh, it looks like almost double the conductive material in this upgrade.
And then I'm choosing this 6 gauge wire as the replacement for this little blocked chassis ground strap. All right, look at that, before and after. And yes, I'm just leaving this bare because that just clamps down into the aftermarket battery terminal end that I'm using, which is this one right here. And if you know, you know. As over time, for some reason on Toyotas, these just seem to deteriorate away and they have a very thin wall typically. So if you let these get corroded at all or any battery acid buildup, they just disappear. So now to complete the big 3, I'm also going to be replacing this cable that goes from the fuse box to the alternator. And I'm just going to say, I don't truly think this is necessary if you're just upgrading the alternator, but I've just been wanting to do the big 3 to this truck for so long. I've just been saying for years I'm going to do it and just haven't found the time because it's not like a problem, you know? But if you look inside here, we do see a little bit of corrosion on the wire. It already is plenty enough for the new alternator, but I'm already in here. I've already got everything apart, and I really only want to loom everything back together and tie it up back together once. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull this out of the loom as well, upgrade this one, and then put everything back in. So it is that alternator power wire, the negative from the block to the battery terminal, and the negative from the block to the chassis. Those 3 wires make up the big 3 electrical upgrade. And for that, I'm choosing this 2 gauge wire. I like this because it's nice and flexible, so I'll have no problem getting it back to the original shape. And there's a little side-by-side comparison of the amount of conductive material. Bit of an upgrade there. Now I did already start to remove it, but you can see how this heat shrink material out here has already started to become damaged. So I'm taking it off just to see what the wire looks like underneath here.
Oh yeah,
check that out. Oh my gosh, we do have quite a bit of corrosion going on there. So yeah, this is definitely an upgrade. Definitely had some voltage drop across this wire, that's for sure. Okay, and there's my final piece of the puzzle there. So these 3 complete my big 3. I'm gonna get all these reinstalled and really take my time routing everything, wrapping everything, cleaning everything back up, and making sure that they're in their proper location because we don't want this to rub on any belts. Obviously, we don't want to start any fires. This is supposed to be an upgrade. This is supposed to make our charging system better. So installation and really paying close attention to it is a crucial part of this upgrade. So I just got through putting the entire wire harness back together. Let me show you where we're at. Down at the block here, underneath the vehicle, you can see there's my 12mm bolt fastened with my 2 new ground straps. And I did put them in this heat protective sleeve because with heat is increased resistance. And the whole reason that we wanted to increase the size of our wires is to lower resistance and allow that amperage to flow more freely through the conductive material. Here inside of the wheel well, you can see that even though my wires are a little bit longer and they're thicker now and they've got that sheathing, they're not coming anywhere near that steering shaft. That's extremely important. We don't want any rubbing to happen. And on the other side of the wheel well, you can see that I've got this clip fastened again to the side of the alternator, and I got both of my little 10mm bolts refastened so that wire harness is in place against the side of the alternator. You can see that all of my big battery wires now are covered in sheathing that will help prevent any sort of rubbing, as well as helps with heat resistance. And taking a look from above, you can see I wrapped everything really nicely, routed my wires, actually brought these to the front because I thought they'd have a little bit more room. And you can see how I just loomed everything back together. You can also see I replaced the boot here on top of the alternator and fastened that 10mm bolt. Also, you can recall all of the little zip ties that I cut off of the fuse box initially, 2 there, 1 over here, 1 in the back here that you can't see. I've got everything back together, and look at that nice big new power wire
going to our alternator fuse, plenty of room. Everything is just really nice. That's not going anywhere.
Obviously, installation is pretty much just the reverse of removal, but I just wanted you guys to see how I routed my new wires, how I wrapped everything together, how I loomed it all, how nice it looks. And
Now what I'm gonna do is put my fan shroud and my fan back on. I'm gonna connect back up my thermostat and my lower radiator hose, refill my cooling system, reinstall my battery, and let's check to see how our alternator is charging now.
well, I'm gonna say that was a massive success. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope that this video gave you the confidence that you need to replace the alternator on your Gen 2 Tacoma, or maybe upgrade to the 130 amp tow package alternator. And additionally, if you felt like doing the big 3, I hope that this video gave you inspiration to do so. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for liking. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for doing all of the things, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.